1. So, my friend and I were just eating at this popular bubble tea place in Chinatown, minding our own business. And then here enters the 3 bitches that I take petty revenge on. I'll just randomly name them Brittany, Susan, and Deborah, cause why not? Side note, I speak Cantonese, Chinese dialect. My friend speaks Vietnamese. At a far glance, I sometimes look more Japanese than Chinese for some reason, so that's probably why they didn't care about speaking so loudly in Chinese. The following statements were said, in Cantonese, by the bitches who entered and sat at a nearby table. Brittany: "Look at that fat girl over there. Ugh." Susan: "She needs to stop eating and go to the gym." Brittany: "Ugly people need to stay at home instead of coming out in public." FYI, they were definitely talking about us because, on top of them looking at us, there was only one other group in the back, but that group consisted of pretty skinny people. Another side note: in Cantonese, the word ugly can be interpreted as just bad-looking or unpresentable. But the context she was using the word, it was to be offensive instead of just some opinion. Now this went on for about 5 minutes. I let my friend know because I wasn't just going to let her sit in the dark while these bitches talked shit about her in a fucking different language. In English, this is what I said. Me: "Y'all got something to say?" This was moderately loud, by the way. Brittany: "Can you mind your own business?" Me: "If y'all got shit to say, might as well say it in English." Brittany: "We're not talking about you. How about you stop eavesdropping?" Okay, you're lying to me now, huh? Okay. I devised a plan. I taught my friend the basic Cantonese words for well said, yes, exactly, totally, honestly. Me in Cantonese: "Sis," this is how some people refer to each other who they're close to, "look at those bitches over there. They have some nerve to talk shit, but won't be upfront about it. How pitiful." Friend: "Well said," in Cantonese. Now I said it loud enough for them to hear. I was legit just staring them down with my friend. They noticed, and were trying to act all chill about it. Other things said were: Me: "If that bitch really wants to talk about ugly, she should check her mouth first." I pretty much called her a trash-talking bitch. Me: "You hear that? Now they're quiet." No, they're quiet. How gullible. Me: "This ugly bitch is so insecure about herself, she has to talk shit about people behind their backs." Tisk tisk. Now Brittany had to go get some sauce, and I thought it'd be a great idea to go get napkins with my friend at the same time. Napkins and sauces were next to each other at the front. We timed it to where we ran into Brittany, and she's just looking at us. Then I say, me: "Move, my fat friend is coming through. You might as well back away before you get any of her ugly." Brittany backs away, and my friend and I walk over to get napkins. Then I thought of this nice gem. Me: "Ah, you lowly people, do y'all need napkins? Might as well clean up your mouths or even hide your ugly faces." I used a term that translates to lowly person, but it's more offensive in Cantonese. Anyways, we go back to our table and just look at the trio bitches. Finally, Brittany said something, but this time in English. Brittany: "What do you want from me?" Me: "I want you and your friends to go home since, ugly people need to stay home instead of coming out in public." Deborah suggests that they just apologize for the fat shaming, but Brittany wants to be stubborn. I continue my Cantonese comments for about a minute before Brittany just picks up her stuff and leaves in anger. Her 2 friends follow a few seconds later. I honestly took things out of proportion with my comments, but then again, it all started with the fat shaming, like it's okay if you call someone fat because it's kind of a fact. If my friend is fat. But you don't just say how her being fat makes her ugly, and then say the rest of those negative things. 2. Many years ago, I got a programming job for a very new oil and gas automation company. They were the company that O&G companies would hire to build the SCADA systems for their wells. I had heard of the owner from other people in the industry as being interesting to work with, but if they had come right out and said he was insane, that would have saved me some trouble. I was the only SCADA programmer in the office, and as such, was incredibly busy with our clients. I was also the only other woman than the receptionist. Being in a male-dominated industry had never bothered me. I used to go to well sites and got used to seeing hardcore porn on the walls. I've been out of the industry for over 10 years, so I don't know if they've cracked down on that, but I doubt it. But people would allow me to do my job. The owner of this company, however, treated me like his secretary. He'd expect me to get him coffee, make appointments, etc., all while continuing to do my real job. The last straw was the day he berated me in earshot of a client for failing to pick up his dry cleaning. Even though I had just spent the last 4 hours on the phone trying to troubleshoot why a well wasn't talking to the SCADA system. Aside, it turned out it was on fire, and no one knew because it was so remote. I had managed to last a month before I finally gave my 2 weeks' notice. Honestly, I could have just walked out, but I wanted to be nice and help him train someone to take my place before I left, so our clients weren't left in the lurch. When I told him I was leaving, he went ballistic. He yelled that he wanted nothing to do with me ever again, and to leave his office that minute because he didn't want to be in the same room for even a second. We would never work together again, and I'd regret leaving. He was still yelling when I turned around and left the building without saying anything. Less than a week later, I had found a new job with an actual oil and gas company. Fast forward a few months and I loved my job. I was on a very busy team that dealt with many of the company's well sites. We had so much work, in fact, that we had to consider bringing in outside contractors. Because I knew the systems we were dealing with better than anyone on the team, I was put in charge of assisting the department manager in choosing an automation company to bring in. Being one of the larger O&G companies meant we were courted by every support company, so we had a ton of bids to go through for this job. One of the lowest bids was, of course, Insane Ex-Manager's company. So he was called in for a meeting. The department manager was running late that day, so she didn't get a chance to brief me as to whom we were meeting before we walked into the conference room. Or I would have given her a heads up. We walked in, and the automation company owner's face lost all color when he realized who he was meeting with. Before either the department manager or I could so much as say hello, he started sputtering that there was a misunderstanding between us, and he had no hard feelings if I didn't. I told him that I had no hard feelings against him, but in his own words, we would never work together again. He was right. Epilogue. He ended up making enemies of every O&G company in the city, and eventually went out of business because no one would hire him. We hired a couple of his ex-employees later on, and they told us some horror stories. I actually got away easy. 3. So I was a low-level manager at a restaurant. I was friends with all the servers. I worked my way up. The rest of the managers were mostly brought in. I would work my butt off to help them. I'd clean tables, comp tickets, even when it's my lunch, refill drinks if they were in the weeds, etc. We're in this together. These are my people. I was getting married. Majority of my guests and bridesmaids are my co-workers. I got my dress at Rhymes with Mavid's Bridal. My mom wasn't there for the dress shopping. She lived 5 states away. That weekend we were going back for the fitting, and I was super excited to show my mom my wedding dress and veil. Lady comes in to pick up her to-go order. Chicken fingers and fries. They had just been made piping hot. No problems or exceptions to the order. She's wearing a branded bridal polo. She comes back 2 minutes later, claims the order is cold, we used old fries, etc. I watched them make the order. She must have opened the box in the car, there's no way it's cold. But, okay, we'll make you another. I get the kitchen to drop the new tenders and fries. The general manager goes to comp the meal. We always go over the top for customer service. Lady then claims to-go girl was rude to her. I was there, she didn't do anything out of turn. She doesn't care too much about fighting over chicken fingers. She said, "Okay, let me get a manager, we're so sorry." Somehow in the 8 minutes to turn the order around, Lady is even more upset. Manager tries to give her a card for another free chicken finger meal next time she comes in. Order comes up. We give the new hot order to the now yelling lady. She's mad because To-Go Girl wasn't punished enough in front of her. I guess the general manager was supposed to humiliate my friend in front of everyone? He said he'll take care of the discipline problem. He won't, but he apologizes again. She opens her bag of food, opens the box and hurls it. The sauce spills all over my friend's shirt, and she has hot fries and chicken fingers thrown in her face. The lady stomps out. I ask my boss to make a call after we all share the "holy shit, she's crazy." He's confused. I've never asked to use my cell phone on the floor, but he goes along with it. I call Mavid's Bridal and tell them I was a guest at a restaurant and their employee just dumped food and yelled obscenities while in uniform representing their company. Furthermore, I was a bride coming in for a fitting this weekend. I describe the lady and say I don't want her anywhere near my appointment. On top of her being crazy unprofessional, I have people coming in from out of town. It's a special time for me. I don't want her vibe to ruin it. Manager there promises she won't be and is appalled. I've never called anyone else out for bad behavior while in uniform, but my general manager thought this was awesome, and I was totally rocking a PettyRevenge lady boner. Update. I did in fact go back many times. Bridesmaids and additional fittings, shoes, everything wedding. Stopped seeing that lady sometime through these appointments. I didn't notice at first when, but suddenly months had gone by and her face was no longer there. So she probably did get fired, likely not the first incident or unprofessional behavior she displayed. 4. 2004. I'm a few years out of college at my third career posting at a radio station as a promotions director, managing promotions for 2 stations for the Threesley Broadcasting Company. Stable job, hard but decent work, nice but older crowd. Turns out the guy who hired me has a crush on a former station employee who left to work on the Jenny Jones show. He then returned to us after that show got cancelled. He asks me to take her on as an intern, knowing full well that made no sense as she had logged more time in her past at the station than I had accrued myself. Sure enough, a few weeks later I'm out the door, she's got my job, and they're dating. As a promotions director, I was responsible for all the station's contests, and the station's adherence to FCC rules on radio contests, which are strict as fuck. Google Prize Chance Consideration and radio. Around the time of my firing, our station and everyone else was sucked in by the Trading Spaces TV show craze. So the station decided to bring in a bunch of local businesses to try to pull it off, offering free renovations to a pair of listeners. Except doing that by the rules would be a major pain in the ass, especially if the winners were actually selected by random. They could have major remediation work necessary prior to these fantasy renovations, insurance and liability issues due to unpermitted structures already on their property, etc. So, the geniuses decided to cherry-pick a pair of winners that would be easiest to give renovations to. Bad idea. I advised them of this, as was my job, and was shit-canned the same week. My first move was to send a cute little email to the station fan database, which I still had access to, letting them know about the scam contest they were all hoping to win in a yet-to-be-held drawing. I then received a call from the station manager, telling me my severance offer was being rescinded, or about $600. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't just work for one station, there were 2. A 70s, 80s and 90s adult contemporary station, and a new station that the company was in the process of selling. So I fired up a web browser to fcc.gov, and blew the big ol' whistle on their scam contest practices. Boom. FCC investigation commences, the sale is put on hold, and they have to reduce the asking price by a full $1 million before the sale goes through. Kiss my ass, Threesley Broadcasting, and Gary the Bagel Guy. 5. A good friend of mine has about 4 years ago inherited the house of his grandparents. He decided to live there for the time being, till he has decided what to do with the house. He grew up in it, so he did not really want to sell it. Not even a week after he moved in, he got a visit from a neighborhood committee, They said they are the 3 board members of the Homeowners Association, and are here so he can sign his membership papers. They were extremely nosy and rude. For example, one tried to get into the garage without so much as asking. When he stopped him and asked him where he wanted to go, he had the audacity to say, "I need to check your garage. If everything in there is in order, I have a right to do this bi-weekly, and denying me access is an offense that will cost a fine." He then had enough of their audacity and kicked them out of the house. While doing so, one of the board members shoved some papers into his face and told him he needed to sign this right now. He would live there a week already, and his papers had to be signed before moving in. Once they were gone, he took a look at the papers. They were fucking ridiculous, and gave the Homeowners Association rights that were simply unfucking real. They had, for example, a right to visit your home bi-weekly, and check things like you do not use the garage for storage, don't have gasoline in containers in your garage, same goes for gas. You had to mow your lawn every week. Snow had to be shoveled every 2 hours when it snowed, starting at 5 o'clock in the morning. You could not park more than 1 car on your grounds, except inside the garage, and a ton of other bullshit. A few days later they came back, and asked him why he did not sign the papers yet. They also wanted to check the garage again. This time he would not even let them in, and told them that he would never become a member of their stupid club. To them, that meant war. Within a week, they had sent him fines north of $1,000, several of which were for denying them access to his home, each worth $250. My friend simply did not take them seriously, and used their stupid letters to help fire his grill. Then the day came when they went extremely too far. He came back, and one of the board members had broken into his garage, stood in it, and was writing things down on his notepad. But that was not even the worst part. He had 2 wonderful oak trees in front of the house. They had been planted by his great-grandparents when they were newlyweds and moved into the house. The Homeowners Association was in the process of taking them down. They had called a professional crew for this. One was already so damaged, basically all twigs were already down. It was just a stump that was left. The other one they had just started with, he fucking lost it. He told the tree crew to stop right the fuck now, and explained to them that he was the owner, and that what they did was highly illegal. They had no idea, since the board member claimed these trees were in violation of the rules, since supposedly too many leaves went to the neighbor's garden. He had told them that was no legal reason to put them down, but the board member claimed he had given his okay, because the trees were in violation of the rules of the Homeowners Association. He looked it up later. They actually had a bylaw that if a garden produces more than 1 40-litre sack of leaves within 2 weeks, the garden owner needs to take down the offending trees within 2 weeks. He told them he would overlook them trespassing if they would be witnesses in court for him. Then he called the cops on the board members for trespassing, breaking and entering. They actually had used a bolt cutter to get into the garage. He always had it closed with a big fucking bike lock after they had tried to get in it twice before. The process must have been glorious. Not only did they have to repay him for the lock and the tree, which was worth a shit ton of money north of $50,000, if I remember right, plus damages for the second tree. He had a professional tree person look after it, so all the damage healed properly, which alone cost over $1,000. But these idiots actually thought the trial would have been unfair, and tried to fight it, which probably cost him an additional $10,000 to $15,000 in lawyers and court costs. All in all, this trial must have cost him over $120,000. Then he went to yet another civil court and sued them for emotional damage. He told them how much these trees meant to him since his great-grandparents had planted them, with seeds from the home country. He really laid it on as thick as he could. Plus he felt threatened by the Homeowners Association and can hardly sleep, because he always fears they'll try to get into his house. The court actually bought it, and gave him $500,000, plus the cost for a state-of-the-art alarm system, so he can feel safe again in his own home. So, put all together, he cost the Homeowners Association nearly $750,000. They had to file for bankruptcy, and get a person to check the books so my friend would get his money. The best is for last. The mediator found out that these 3 pricks had been defrauding the Homeowners Association for well over 10 years, and were giving out as many fines as they possibly could so they could use it to bolster their income. All 3 had to sell their houses so they could pay out my friend. Now he is, for most people, one of the favourite people living there, and he constantly gets invited over for grilling and whatnot. You see, most people never wanted the Homeowners Association in the first place, but the board members practically forced them to sign the contract, claiming it would not be optional, and if they did not sign before moving in, it would be a $500 fine. Only 6 of the over 50 members actually wanted this Homeowners Association, and people think they did it to get a part of the action as a reward for spying out their neighbours to find violations. 6. First of all, I understand leaving something behind in an Uber is a pain in the ass for the driver. Uber has recently added a $15 fee for a driver returning an item, which I completely support, and in the past, I've given a driver a $20 tip for returning my item. Now to my story. Late Friday night, I left both my phone and wallet in an Uber on my way home from a party. I thought they might have been left at the party, so I waited until Saturday morning to check before reaching out to the Uber driver. My phone is off, so no luck with Find My iPhone, which is strange because I went out with a full charge. My friend is unable to find it at his place, and I reach out to the driver. I try him a few times throughout the day, and either get his voicemail or he answers and immediately hangs up. I understand they work weird hours, so no alarms yet. Finally I get through and he confirms he has the phone, but says he can't meet today. When I ask when he can meet, he starts to pretend he can't hear me and just says, "Hello? Hello?" before hanging up. I try him the rest of Saturday and Sunday, getting the same voicemail and hang up runaround. I reach out to Uber, who reaches out to him directly asking about my items. Monday morning, Uber tells me he doesn't have them, and despite me telling them that he confirmed that he did on Saturday, they were about as helpful as you'd expect. I get a hold of the driver Monday afternoon after repeated attempts, which is only the second time I've spoken to him at this point. His story is now that he doesn't have them, and when I say I'm going to get the cops involved, he hesitates for a second, but then doubles down and says he can prove he doesn't have them. I file the police report, and then as a last-ditch effort, decide to take the number I got from his answering machine. Uber connects you via phone rather than giving you their number, and text him, offering $200 for my items returned, no questions asked. Well guys, as luck would have it, he found my phone and wallet. My offer must have made them magically appear out of thin air. I grab $200 from the bank, and we arrange a meeting time, which he repeatedly moves. I'm having to do all this without a phone, so shout out to my lovely wife for coordinating this all. He's apparently very excited during this call, and is asking how his reward will be paid. I wait in the rain for an hour for this guy, in a sea of downtown Chicago Ubers. Finally I spot his car, confirm it's him, and jump into the front seat. I pull out the money and ask to see my stuff, which he pulls out of his center console and places near me. I start counting out the money on my lap, and once I reach $200, I pick it up, take my wallet and phone and say, "Here you go," without actually handing it to him. I book it out the car and don't look back. I go the opposite way he's facing so that he can't follow me, and make my way to a pedestrian-only courtyard. Surprise, surprise, my phone is turned off with plenty of battery left, which means he turned it off so I couldn't find it. I feel for Uber drivers who have to deal with customers leaving stuff behind, but I would have happily worked with him to make it as convenient as possible to return my things. Refusing to coordinate and then lying about having things that you find is theft. And it felt great to pull a fast one on this asshole. 7. Back in my army days, we were stationed at a basic training camp, Uchebka, that doubled as a signal corps base. I was completing my officer training military interpreter, and was quite full of the army bullshit by that time, same as most everyone in my platoon. I had a couple of months left to complete my training, and by that point, I had no intention to pursue a military career. The qualification was what I was after. A particular annoyance was a certain captain who was very fond of staging fire alarm drills in the middle of the night. I guess the equivalent for his position would be something like a drill sergeant in any of the NATO armies. But the Russian army does things a little differently. Sergeants are a little different from enlisted officers in the amount of authority they have, and the roles normally expected of drill sergeants are relegated to lower-ranked commissioned officers, mostly lieutenants and sometimes captains. I don't know. I guess that asshole felt he was unfairly treated and deserved a better position, so he took it out on the guys. A fire drill at 3 a.m. in November is no fun. The end result was almost always even worse. Standing out in the open listening to his screaming rants about us not meeting the expectations future officers should abide by. That was the exact opposite of what any sane person would call a healthy outdoors activity. We were all either fresh out of college by that time or were in our final years, so, dumb as we were, we wanted and planned to get back at him in some way. Preferably a very humiliating one. Unfortunately, the Signal Corps soldiers were one step ahead of us. I guess they had to deal with even more of his bullshit than we had. One beautiful winter night, the shrill fire alarm goes off again, but this time the night watch led by a junior sergeant decides to do things by the book. Remember, junior sergeant rank is closer to something like private first class. He is a regular soldier for almost all intents and purposes. In the 3-floor HQ building, the so-called secret archive was kept on the second floor in a huge 2 by 1.5 meter cabinet, welded out of angle iron and sheet metal. The thing probably weighed about half a ton empty, which it wasn't, of course. And the field manual was quite specific about the fact that under no circumstances the archive should be allowed to burn, under threat of severe charges to both the watch and command officers at the base. The field manual said it should be hauled out of the burning building as a first priority. I guess the book was referring to a regular old fire-resistant safe, not this huge armoured monstrosity. The solution was pre-planned and swift. The 6 of them were strong enough to push that steel cabinet out of the second-floor window, taking part of the wall and all of that window with it in the process. The sergeant then proceeded to report his actions up the chain of command, again very much by the book. The amount of screaming and shouting was staggering. The captain looked both very angry and very lost at the same time. I have never again seen this combination of emotions to this date. The aftermath of these heroics was glorious. The damage done to the building was repaired in a few days. The safe did not survive the fall, and was replaced with half a dozen smaller standard steel cabinets. The captain was forbidden ever again from staging fire drills at this base, and filed a transfer report in about a week after the incident. The funniest thing was that the CO of that base had no way of reprimanding the junior sergeant, without looking bad or criminally negligent at the same time, so he had to grudgingly commend his actions. The remaining 6 months or so of his service went relatively uneventfully. The story became the stuff of legends, and is fondly remembered every time I meet with my friends from that time. 8. So this is a story about my parents around 7 or 8 years ago, when I was barely leaving elementary school. I was really young and my parents kept my sister and I in the dark at the time, but they later told me the gist of what happened. First thing first, my parents owned 2 houses. They decided to keep the old house when they bought a new one so they could rent it out. The old house was in a decent area, but on the edge of the not-so-good part of the city, so it attracted a lot of the wrong crowd when my parents put it up for rent. After the horror story of the first tenant, used a dumb loophole in our state in order to live there for almost 6 months rent-free, my parents found a single woman with temporary foster kids who was interested. Let's call her Bad Tenant. She seemed really nice at first, housing kids who needed a home and selling homemade tacos from her taco cart. My parents did a background check and see that her income from the state for the kids should cover the rent and figure her side hustle would help her out. Everything is signed and she moves in with her kids immediately. Now the wrongdoing. Bad Tenant had decided to take in a lot more kids, given that our house was larger than her previous one. I have nothing against these kids, and they are just victims, but they tore that house to shreds. I remember countless times of going with my dad to the house, and handing him tools while he fixed a variety of broken things, especially the toilets and general plumbing. Eventually my dad had enough and told her all the maintenance he was doing was 1. Not required since the house was in perfect condition when she moved in, and was not due to anything on my parents' part. We planned on moving back after my sis finished high school, so we replaced anything we thought would break and repainted it. 2. Caused by the way too many kids in the house. This pissed off bad tenant, and she stopped paying her rent. Just some backstory. My dad is a fairly reasonable guy, and I've never seen him give attitude to anyone, let alone yell. My mother, however, is your typical Hispanic mother, who don't take shit from anyone. That being said, when my mom took me with her to pick up the rent, where bad tenant said some nasty things to my mom, she kinda lost it. The screaming match was awful, but there was no physical contact on either end, and it ended with bad tenant basically stating she wasn't going to pay a cent until my dad came back and continued doing all the maintenance he was doing prior. Bad tenant was dead serious about this, and my parents had to take her to court. I later learned she only did this in order to stay at the house a little longer without having to pay rent. My parents were pissed. This was the second time a tenant had gotten away without paying rent. At this point, I need to say I truly love my dad, but Mom is the most dedicated person I know. If she wants something, she will find a way to get it. She was born and raised in Central America, traveled all the way to the US, went to school, learned English on her own, supported her brothers and worked all the time. That being said, my mom was not going to let this woman take advantage of us. The first thing she did was head to child services with photos of the house condition, courtesy of my father, who always took photos of the house when he went over for the maintenance. They looked over and thanked my parents profusely for the evidence, and told them they would look into it. Next, my parents got a lawyer who collected all the photos we took before she moved in, to prove the house's condition before she moved in. Now, I wasn't in the courtroom, but from what my dad told me, it was the most satisfying thing he's ever seen. Bad tenant's lawyer was a huge joke, and was obviously the cheapest and most inexperienced lawyer around. Bad tenant and her lawyer basically tried lying for every point they made, where my dad and his lawyer simply pulled out a photo or message completely destroying their argument. Eventually, bad tenant was contradicting herself, and the judge rules in my parents' favor. Now, my parents knew that they were not going to see a dime from the lady, given that she no longer could house kids. It also turns out she was using her mother's name in order to house even more kids, which explains why they were given to her to the start. So she was going to answer for that too. Double whoops. Lastly, just to put the cherry on the cake, my parents put a lien on her taco cart, so she couldn't make money that way either. Fucking triple whoops. 9. There was a fire across the street from a student's apartment building, and due to the smoke, a number of them were asked to leave by the fire department. As such, we had a good number of students staying with us. Generally, I prefer students over adults, as A, they're my age, and B, for every one shitty student, I have dozens of shitty older people. Prime shitty range is late 40s to early 60s. I usually try to go a little out of my way for students as well. They come in drunk late at night and I'll make them fresh cookies or offer to let them go up to our roof that overlooks the college campus we're located on. Shit I'm not technically allowed to do, but I figure especially for students, they're paying a hefty price to stay here, so the least I can do is make it a bit nicer. So it's around midnight, and this group of 4 students come in. 2 of them are staying with us on their parents' credit card. I only know this because one kid was lightly making fun of the girl for having daddy save her at check-in, and the other 2 are just their friends. We get to chatting, and have what to me was a great conversation. Talk about various things a bit deeper than you normally would with a customer, I assume, but nothing philosophical. Our plans for the next few years, opinions on cities, how backwoods and reactionary the area I grew up in was. They were also familiar with the area, and 2 of them grew up less than an hour from where I grew up. They joke that they're sad there's no cookies left, and I tell them if they give me 15 minutes I can go bake some more. I ask them how many they want, and I tell them, honestly, you can have as many as you want. And they say 1 each is fine. But I can tell they want more, so I say again, No, honestly, you guys can have as many as you want. They're not my cookies and we buy in bulk. They cost like 5 to 10 cents each. The one guy asks if they could have 15. I tell them that's not a problem at all, and go bake them. While they're cooking, I say they're free to go up to their room and I can bring them up if they want. They agree to just wait in the lobby, so we continue talking. Again, above average conversation. Not getting any weird vibes from them, and they all seem super friendly and generally nice. We talk about our parents. The girl whose parents had paid for the room were apparently super strict. They think she's never done drugs, hasn't drank, still goes to church every weekend. She laughs and says how mad they'd be if they knew she was staying at a hotel with a guy. Important. Cookies are done. They head up to their room super thankful, and I get that little twinge of happiness from helping to make their night a little better. Fast forward about 3 hours. I hear what sounds like tittering whispers and that gasping thing people do when they're crying, coming from the basement. I go down the first bend of the stairs. There's a landing halfway down where it turns 180 degrees so you can't see straight down, and 2 of the girls turn the corner. They look teary-eyed, but weirdly are giggling. I assume they got into fights with their boyfriends or something. The group was 4 of 2 guys, 2 gals, both dating. And none of it's my business, so I say, sorry, I thought I heard something down here. Just wanted to check what it was. People seem to cry in the open in our hotel a lot. And in general, crying makes me uncomfortable, but especially I don't want to deal with crying at my job. Go back to what I was doing, and I have a window open due to the weather, so I get a big backdraft that pulls this really strong scent of weed up from the basement. Things all fall together. They were teary-eyed from smoking, plus the laughing and their nervousness. Plus there's only a microwave and ice machine in our basement, and they weren't using either. So I go back down to the basement, and the elevator door is just closing. I can smell weed prominently once I get to the actual bottom of the stairs. Our elevator is slow as fuck, and I figure I can just take the stairs and catch them at their floor. I get there, and they must have just beat me because I hear their door close as I reach the landing. Get to their room, and I can definitely smell weed. Now I'm an avid smoker. There was a time in my life where I was high nearly 24/7 for the better part of a year. I've since cut back to a few times a week, but still smoke heavily. I don't have a problem with weed or even smoking in the hotel, as long as people are discreet about it. I have a spiel that I give guests when I catch them smoking. We're supposed to have no warnings and just charge them $250, deep cleaning fee, which is really just shampooing the rugs and washing the curtains. But I think that's way too much, so despite having caught maybe 30 to 40 people in the time I've worked here, I've only charged one person, and that was only after 2 warnings, and him being a real asshole every time. Anyways, my spiel generally goes, I'm not implying you were smoking, but as a note, there is a $250 charge if you are caught smoking inside the hotel. We also reserve the right to remove you from your room as part of the agreement you signed at check-in. Now I'm sure none of us want that, so just if you were smoking, please limit doing so outside the hotel, or stuff a towel under the door on the bathroom vent and open the windows. At this time I'm not charging you, so with that, I hope the matter's taken care of. And 95% of the time they agree and are thankful for getting off, so there's no problem. I knock on their door and no answer. They had just gone in the room. I saw the door closing, so there's no way they don't hear me. I knock again. I can hear them whispering in their room. It's that pathetic whisper drunk or high people do, that's way too loud to not be heard, even through a door. I'm quoting them, but obviously it's not exact, just what I remember. Oh my god, he followed us into the basement and then followed us back here. So fucking creepy. I knock again. Guys, just act like we're not here and he'll leave. What's that pussy gonna do? I don't know. I'm just going to bed. Don't answer the door. The discussion goes on like this for another few seconds. I knock again, and they get less focused on the door and more focused on calling me names, it seems. Whatever, sticks and stones. Then one of them calls me a faggot, and I figure that's about where I draw the line. I had mentioned being bisexual to them, leave their door and go back to my computer to charge them. Calm down on the walk back, and figure I'll give them one more try. Call the room and get no answer. Call back one more time and no answer. Put the charge on their dad's credit card. It shows as a smoking penalty on the receipt. Also hooked up to her dad's email address. I can tell as it matches the name on the card. First name, last name @gmail. Maybe 5 minutes later I get a call at the front desk. Pick up and it's them. Hey, so we were sleeping and we think we got a call, but we missed it and it just took us a while to figure out how to call you back. I reminded them that I saw them in the basement a few minutes ago. Oh yeah, we went up and fell right asleep. I tell them the reason I was knocking was to tell them we have a charge for smoking in the room. And immediately they go on a diatribe about how there was a fire across from their street, and that must have been the smoke I smelled. I tell them I understand that, but I also know that weed has a distinctly different smell. She admits to smoking, but it was outside the hotel, then we came back. I tell her I've been sitting in our lobby all night, and as that's our only door in or out, that's impossible. One of the guys gets on the phone, same one who called me a faggot. Come on, dude. Can't you just, let this slide? I'm sorry, the charge has already been posted. Have a nice night. Fuck you! Click. Looked up the dad's email again in their reservation. Type up some facetious standard letter that we send out for smoking penalties so there's no way she can deny it to her parents. Say they have been given multiple warnings, and that the smoke smell had been independently confirmed by 2 separate workers. Even find a way to naturally worm in there that she was staying with a separate guest. Saying it's a guy might make it too obvious, I feared. In case he just doesn't notice the penalty charge on the receipt, I figure a separate email will ensure he sees it. And I get that little twinge of happiness in seeing shitty things happen to shitty people. 10. Back in October 2017, I moved in with a friend, G, and his roommate T. After they moved out together from their previous and needed a third. T and I hit it off right away. G is a pothead, and he got me started on the habit. I gave it up in December. I felt tired and slow all the time. G kept going as normal. The house we moved into had all sorts of problems. I'm a handyman, so I'd fix whatever I could, and I was only ever reimbursed for materials, minus my share. It was kind of shitty, for my labour went unpaid, but whatever. I never brought it up, and it never bothered me. The landlord was always giving excuses as to why he couldn't fix it, and would deduct it from the rent instead. It worked out, but it was a pain in my ass. One fateful day in January, T had been out since the day before, so it was just G, the cats, and me. I went to have my morning piss, only to find that the toilet is completely smeared in piss, as well as the floor. I am livid. I recorded it over WhatsApp and sent it to the group. I said it was unacceptable and that it needed to be cleaned before I decided to do it. G wakes up and immediately starts with the bullshit. Well, that's a big leak. We need a plumber. I reply that it wasn't possible for a leak to crawl up the walls of the bowl and make a mess all over. He then blamed the cats. I am somewhat allergic to cats, specifically their piss. Just a whiff of it will have me coughing a lung out. I bring this up as well. His tone went from, "Huh, that is so weird," to, "Quit your bitching, I'll clean it up, you faggot." And he did, and from that moment on his demeanour and attitude changed completely. He would send passive-aggressive messages if I had any dishes left over from the day before. He would send passive-aggressive videos if my TV, which was in the living room, was dusty. When I got home and said hi, he would ignore me. So I started ignoring all of it. I stopped saying hi to him, and limited myself to only speaking to him when absolutely necessary. He didn't like that. Whenever we'd both be walking in opposite directions, he would square up and try to shoulder shove me out of the way. We are both pretty big dudes, so at first I took it in jest. But later I'd stiffen up and send him flying every single time he tried it. You never forget how to hip or shoulder check someone. He eventually stopped with the physical confrontations and would complain to T about me. His complaints ranged from, "He won't even greet me," to, "I never see him do any housework." One day his insane girlfriend was over and they had a massive fight at 2 a.m. where she took his PC, which I built, and threw it across the room. He sent me a message the day after along the lines of, "Fix it, I'll pay." I replied that I would fix it for free, but only if my friend G asked. I wouldn't touch it otherwise. He took issue with that, and told me he had no need to establish a friendship with me. I told him that I had no need to fix a computer, so I wouldn't do it. He stormed out of my room and left the building. A few weeks later, I left my Tupperware soaking in the sink. He sent a message to the group stating that it was unacceptable to have dirty dishes. All the while he had days' worth of dishes at any given time. I asked if we were expected to clean up daily, and he blew up saying how he was tired of having an ungrateful, arrogant, violent prick in his home. Lease is under his name, we all pay equal parts of the rent, and he wanted me gone by the end of the month. I got home, laughed at him, and he threatened to have me evicted legally. And if that failed, he'd throw my stuff out on the streets. He claimed that because his name was on the lease, his word was law. I challenged him to do either, and got a nifty little surveillance program that uploads straight to YouTube. I caught him once going into my room, realizing my webcam was on, and walking out. When I got home, I broadcasted this video to the TV and confronted him. His stance was that I was illegally recording him, and he'd sue me. I told him to go for it. I still don't know why he went in. He turned violent and aggressive. I decided to just be the bigger man and leave, so I moved out on Saturday. I figured I'd stop the drama, leave, and that'd be the end of it. Nope. On Saturday night, he sends a message. Like a bitch. On Monday morning, I called the landlord. On the lease, there is a clause that states that the use of recreational drugs is forbidden. I told him that G's substance abuse had forced me to leave, because the apartment was filthy all the time and reeked of pot. He told me he was going to make a surprise visit. I told him when to best catch him blazing. On Tuesday, the landlord called me to ask if I would testify against G. Apparently, the landlord did go and dropped in on him. The stench of pot was unmistakable. Police were involved, and G apparently assaulted the landlord. He is being evicted, and I have a court date coming up. I sent him a message. Good thing it's your name on the lease. Got no reply. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to the Revenge's Ice Cream Archives, Episode 1. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. For those of you who are new and have never heard of me before, hello, welcome. To old fans, also hello and welcome. I'm going to be taking 10 stories from my YouTube Revenge's Ice Cream series archives and putting them in one video. And I'll be doing that one a week is the hope. If that goes well, we'll see. I have plans for other podcasts here and there, but if you want to make sure you're updated on a weekly basis, then just pop this into your podcast app, subscribe, subscribble, all that sort of thing, and I'll hopefully see you next week. Or hear you. See with our ears. Yeah, something like that. My best wishes to you all. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.